The first thing people tell you about Black Hollow is not to stop there after dark, not because of crime, not because of animals, just because folks around that part of Appalachia don't trust the woods once the sun drops behind the hills. Back then, I thought that was small town superstition. Now I know better. I was driving through West Virginia during late October, cutting through mountain roads, trying to save time on a trip that already wasn't going great. Rain had been falling for hours, turning the roads slick and covering the valleys in thick gray fog. That's when I saw the sign, Black Hollow, Pop 312. Half the letters were rusted out. The sign leaned sideways like it had been hit years ago and nobody cared enough to fix it. I remember thinking the town looked dead before I even entered it. Most of the buildings sat dark, old brick storefronts, boarded windows, one gas station glowing weak under flickering lights. The mountains around the town rose steep and dense with trees, black against the evening sky like giant walls closing everything in. I stopped at the gas station because my fuel gauge was getting low. The second I stepped out of the truck, I noticed how quiet the place was. No traffic, no voices, no dogs barking, just rain hitting pavement. Inside the station, an old radio played country music low behind the counter while a guy in a camo jacket watched me a little too carefully. "You passing through?" he asked. I told him, "Yeah." He nodded slowly like he was hoping that was true. Then he glanced out the window toward the mountains. "You ought to keep driving." I laughed a little. "That bad around here?" But the guy didn't smile. "Storm rolls in heavy at night," he said. "Roads get dangerous." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like roads wasn't what he actually meant. That's when another man sitting near the coffee machine muttered, especially near the hollow. Nobody responded after he said that. The guy behind the counter immediately changed the subject, asking where I was headed, but I caught it. That little silence, that tiny shift people make when a conversation brushes too close to something real. So naturally, I asked about it. "What's the hollow?" The old man near the coffee machine looked up slowly, and I swear the expression on his face changed the temperature in the room. "You hear whistling out there," he said quietly. "You keep driving." I smirked a little because I thought this was local ghost story nonsense. Then he added, "And if the woods whistle back?" He stopped there. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The entire gas station had already gone quiet again. I paid for the gas and headed back outside. But right before I got in my truck, I noticed something strange. All the lights in town flickered at the exact same time. Every single one. Then the mountains around Black Hollow went completely dark. I should have left Black Hollow right then. Looking back now, that was probably the last normal moment I had. The storm kept getting worse while I drove through town. Rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up, and thick fog rolled down from the mountains like smoke spilling into the streets. Black Hollow looked abandoned once night settled in. Porch lights off, stores closed early, curtains pulled shut. I passed maybe two people the entire time, and the both of them looked away the second my headlights hit them. That town had the kind of fear people don't talk about anymore because talking about it makes it feel real again. I kept driving toward the highway out of town, trying to put the place behind me. Then the GPS lost signal, complete blackout. Map vanished, phone froze, and right after that, my truck radio started making noise. Not static exactly, more like broken interference cutting in and out between channels. At first I ignored it, then I heard whistling. Real faint, low and distant. I frowned immediately and turned the volume knob down, thinking the sound was coming through the speakers, but the whistling didn't stop because it wasn't coming from the radio. It was outside, somewhere in the mountains. I rolled the window down just a little despite the rain, and there it was again, a long, slow whistle echoing through the trees above the road. Not musical, not human, just a single note dragging through the dark. Then silence. The sound gave me chills instantly, not because it was loud, because it felt deliberate, like whoever or whatever made it knew somebody was listening. I hit the gas harder. The road curved sharply along the mountain edge while pine trees crowded close to both sides. Fog drifted across the asphalt in thick waves, making the headlights useless past 30 feet. Then the whistle came again, closer, this time from the opposite side of the road. I slammed the brakes lightly and looked toward the woods. Nothing there, just black trees swaying in rain. But deep inside the fog, I thought I saw movement. Tall shapes standing between the pines. Still, watching the road, lightning flashed across the mountains for half a second, and the shape was suddenly gone. I don't mind telling you, my chest tightened hard right there. Every instinct was screaming to keep driving and never look back. Then something answered the whistle from deeper in the mountains. Another whistle, different pitch, and suddenly the woods around Black Hollow didn't feel empty anymore. They felt occupied, like multiple things were moving through the trees beyond the headlights. I started driving faster, way faster than I should have on wet mountain roads. That's when I saw the figure standing in the middle of the highway ahead. I hit the brakes hard. The truck skidded sideways slightly before stopping, maybe 20 feet away. For 1 second I just stared. Tall man, long coat, head lowered, standing perfectly still in pouring rain. Then slowly, the figure lifted its head toward me, and I realized it wasn't a man at all. The headlights hit it dead center, and for a second my brain genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. The figure standing in the road looked human in shape only, tall, too tall, long, dark coat hanging almost to the pavement, soaked from rain and barely moving in the wind. But where the face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just pale skin stretched smooth across the front of its head, like somebody erased everything that made it human. My whole body locked up. The thing tilted its head slowly toward the truck, and then it whistled. Same sound from the mountains, low, dragging, wrong. Not through lips, not through mouth. The sound just came out of it somehow. I threw the truck into reverse instantly. The tires spun against wet asphalt while rain exploded across the windshield. But the faceless thing didn't move. It just stood there in the middle of the highway while another whistle echoed back from deep in the woods behind it. Then another, then another. Suddenly the mountains around Black Hollow sounded alive, not with animals, with signals, like things hidden in the forest were communicating through those whistles. That's when the faceless thing finally moved, not walking, not running. It jerked forward in this horrible, unnatural motion like frames missing from a video. 1 second far away, next second much closer. I slammed the truck into drive and punched the gas. The engine roared while the truck fishtailed around the figure, barely missing it. And as I passed, I looked at it. Big mistake. Because where the smooth, blank face had been, something was changing beneath the skin. Shapes pressing outward like features trying to form from underneath. Eyes, a mouth, not fully made yet, but becoming. I hit nearly 80 on those mountain roads trying to get away from that thing. Rain hammered the truck so hard it sounded like rocks. The whistle kept echoing through the woods on both sides now, moving with me, surrounding the road, and every once in a while, I'd catch movement between the trees. Tall figures pacing through the forest beside the highway, keeping up. At one point, lightning flashed across the mountains again, and for half a second I saw at least three of them standing among the trees, all faceless, all watching the truck. My hands were shaking hard on the steering wheel by then. I kept telling myself this had to be exhaustion or stress or some mountain town prank gone wrong. But deep down, I already knew something in Black Hollow wasn't human. Then the road ahead disappeared, not ended, disappeared. The fog suddenly became so thick, my headlights bounced straight back at me like white walls. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead anymore. I slammed the brakes hard. The truck slid sideways and crashed through a wooden guardrail. The truck smashed through the guardrail and dropped hard down the embankment. Metal screamed, glass exploded across the cab. I remember the world flipping sideways while rain and mud slammed against the windows. Then the truck hit something solid with enough force to knock the air out of my lungs completely. For a second, everything went black. When I came to, the engine was dead. Only the headlights still worked, cutting crooked beams through heavy rain and thick fog drifting between the trees. I was halfway upside down in the driver's seat with blood running down the side of my face from somewhere near my forehead, and outside the truck, I heard whistling, close, way too close. I unbuckled fast and shoved the door open. Cold rain hit me instantly while mud sucked at my boots. The truck had crashed down into some kind of wooded ravine beneath the highway. Tall trees surrounded everything, dense, dark. The road above was barely visible through the fog. I grabbed my flashlight from the passenger seat and turned it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through rain just enough for me to see movement between the trees. Not one figure anymore, several, standing motionless in the woods. Tall silhouettes wearing long dark coats soaked from rain, faceless, every single one of them. And then one of them whistled. The others answered from deeper in the hollow. I backed away immediately. Every instinct screamed at me to get away from those things before they came closer. That's when my flashlight beam caught something else through the trees. A house. Small, wooden place sitting deeper in the ravine, maybe 100 yards away. One dim orange light glowed through the window. I've never felt relief hit me so fast in my life. I started moving toward it immediately through mud and rain while the whistles echoed behind me. The faceless things didn't chase, didn't run, but every time I looked back, they were closer, not moving when I watched them, just somehow nearer every time I turned around. The house looked ancient once I got near it. Crooked porch, rotting wood, half the window boarded shut, but smoke drifted from the chimney and warm light flickered inside. I ran up the porch steps and pounded on the door hard. "Hey, please." No answer. I hit the door again. Behind me, somewhere in the trees, another whistle echoed. Closer now. Then slowly, I heard footsteps coming from inside the house. The door cracked open just enough for one eye to look out at me. Old woman, gray hair, deep wrinkles, and the second she saw my face, her expression changed to pure fear. Not fear of me, fear for me. You saw them, she whispered immediately. I asked her to let me inside, fast. The old woman looked past me toward the woods, and I swear her face went pale because standing at the edge of the trees behind me, the faceless figures had stopped moving completely. All of them were staring directly at the house. The old woman pulled me inside so fast I nearly stumbled through the doorway. Then she slammed the door shut and locked three separate deadbolts on one after another without saying a word. The house smelled like wet wood, dust, and something old burning in the fireplace. Dim, orange firelight flickered across the walls, barely lighting the room. But the first thing I noticed, every window in the house had been covered. Blankets, wood planks, nails, like whoever lived there was terrified of seeing outside after dark. The old woman kept staring toward the front door while rain hammered the roof overhead. You let them follow you, she whispered. I told her I didn't know what those things were. Then I crashed my truck trying to get away from them. At that, she finally looked at me fully, and there was genuine pity in her eyes. People always think they're getting away, she said quietly. That sentence sat heavy in the room. I asked her what the hell those things were supposed to be. The old woman shook her head immediately. No names. What? You don't name things in Black Hollow after dark. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. No superstition, rule. Like people around here had learned certain lessons the hard way. Then, a whistle echoed outside the house, close enough to feel through the walls. My whole body froze. The old woman closed her eyes like she had been expecting it. Another whistle answered from farther away in the woods, then another. The sound moved through the mountains like signals bouncing between hunters. I walked toward one of the covered windows carefully. The old woman snapped instantly. Don't open that. Too late. I'd already lifted the blanket slightly. Rain poured across the porch outside. The woods beyond the house looked black and endless, and standing just beyond the tree line, one of the faceless figures, closer than before. Its coat hung, and despite the storm, its blank white face pointed directly toward the house, toward me. Then slowly, its head tilted, and from somewhere underneath that smooth, featureless skin, I heard whispering, not whistling. Whispering at first, faint at first, like distant voices speaking through water. I dropped the blanket immediately. What the hell is that? The old woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked toward the fireplace and grabbed an old shotgun leaning beside it. They whistled to find you, she said quietly. And the whispering? Her eyes moved slowly toward the covered windows. That means they're close enough to know your voice. The room suddenly felt smaller after that. Then something tapped against the front porch outside, not knocking. Footsteps, slow, heavy, one long creak of wood after another. The faceless things had reached the house, and judging by the sound, they weren't alone anymore. The footsteps on the porch stopped right outside the front door, not pacing, not scratching, just standing there. Rain hammered the roof while the entire house seemed to hold its breath with us. The old woman gripped the shotgun so tightly her knuckles looked white in the firelight. Then came the whispering again. Only this time, I understood it. At first it sounded like random broken words beneath the storm. Then suddenly my brain logged onto a sentence. Open the door. My chest tightened slightly, and because the voice outside wasn't faceless anymore, it sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same accent, same rhythm. I looked at the old woman in disbelief. She nodded slowly, like she'd seen this happen before. They'll learn you fast, she whispered. Another voice joined it outside, then another, all of them mine. Some whispered softly, some laughed under their breath, some sounded terrified, but every single one was my voice. The thing standing outside the house had somehow copied me already. And hearing yourself speak from the darkness outside a mountain cabin at midnight does something awful to your brain, because part of you keeps wanting to answer back without realizing it. The porch creaked again, one slow step, then another. Something was moving along the walls of the house now. I heard wet fingers dragging across wood, sliding outside the windows. The whispers followed it, closer. Let us in, please. You left me outside. That last sentence hit me hard because it sounded emotional, human, like somebody genuinely freezing in the storm. I started moving toward the door without realizing it. The old woman grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Don't listen to pity, she snapped. That sentence cut through whatever trace had started pulling me forward. I stepped back immediately. Outside, the whispering stopped. Instantly, complete silence hit the house. Then came a whistle, long, sharp, right outside the window beside me. I spun toward it, and for one horrifying second, I saw a face forming beneath the blanket covering the glass, not pressing against the window, forming through it, like skin pushing outward underneath fabric. No eyes yet, no mouth, just shapes trying to become human. The old woman fired the shotgun immediately. The blast exploded through the tiny room. The window shattered outward into rain and darkness. For a second, all I could see was smoke and broken glass. Then lightning flashed outside, and standing on the porch, I saw at least 6 faceless figures surrounding the house, all different heights, all perfectly still, all facing toward me, and slowly, one of them began growing my face beneath the smooth skin. The shotgun blast still echoed inside my head when the silence came back, but it wasn't real silence anymore. It felt staged, like something had paused the world just to check the result of what just happened. Rain still hit the roof, fire still crackled, but everything inside the house felt slightly delayed, like it was no longer syncing properly with reality outside. The old woman was breathing hard, eyes locked on the broken window. She didn't reload the shotgun. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever she had just shot at, it didn't matter. Outside, the faceless figures hadn't moved. They were still standing on the porch, rain pouring off their coats like they didn't feel it at all. But now I could see something different happening, subtle at first. One of them wasn't just standing anymore, it was changing. The smooth, blank face that had been there before was starting to ripple underneath the skin, like something was pushing up from inside it. And then I saw it clearly, a shape forming, my shape, same jawline, same eyes, same expression I was making at that exact moment. It was copying me in real time. The old woman noticed my reaction and grabbed my shoulder. "Don't let it see you reacting," she whispered harshly. But it was already too late. because the moment I thought about it, the one on the porch smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to confirm it knew I understood. Then all of them moved at once, not attacking, stepping closer, slowly, like they were testing how close they could get before the house itself decided to stop being a barrier. The porch boards creaked under their weight, but something strange happened. The wood didn't break, it bent, like it was adjusting to them instead of resisting them. That's when I realized something I still don't like thinking about. The house wasn't protecting us, it was negotiating. The walls creaked again, deeper this time, not damage, alignment. The fireplace flame flickered and leaned slightly toward the broken window, like even fire was reacting to something outside. The old woman whispered, almost to herself now, "It's learning the structure." I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer because one of the faceless figures had reached the window again, closer than before, and this time it wasn't looking at me, it was looking at the old woman, like it had finally decided something specific. Then, softly, from outside the broken glass, I heard her voice calling her name. The moment I heard her name spoken from outside the broken window, the entire house felt like it dropped a few inches in weight, not physically, but emotionally, like reality itself had shifted its attention. The old woman froze completely. That shotgun in her hands suddenly didn't look like protection anymore, just something she was holding out of habit. Outside, the rain kept falling, but even that sound felt distant now, like it was happening in another version of the world. Then the whisper came again, closer, more precise. Her name, not shouted, not mimicked casually, but spoken the exact way someone would say it when they've known you for years. The old woman stepped back one pace, just one, but I saw it immediately. The faceless figures outside reacted to it like a signal. All of them tilted their heads in the same direction at the same time, like synchronization, like obedience. One of them stepped closer to the broken window, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just copying me anymore, it wasn't just copying forms, it was learning relationships, because the face forming on that thing wasn't mine this time, it was hers. The old woman noticed my stare and followed my eyes, her breath caught instantly. "No," she whispered. Outside, the figure tilted its head slightly again, and then it did something worse than anything before. It spoke in her voice, soft, perfect, identical. "Let me in." The old woman took a shaky step backward, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The entities outside weren't just copying identity anymore, they were assigning ownership. The porch boards creaked again under their weight, but now there was no hesitation in them, no testing. The house itself felt like it had stopped resisting completely. The fire in the fireplace dimmed sharply, like it had been told to step aside, and then all of them moved at once, not rushing in, not breaking through, just placing their hands on the structure, and the wood of the house responded. It bent slightly inward, like it recognized them. The old woman finally raised the shotgun again, but her hands were shaking now. "They don't come in," she whispered. "They get accepted." I didn't understand what she meant until I saw the wall beside me ripple slightly, not collapse, not crack, just soften, like it was forgetting it was supposed to be solid. Outside, her voice called again, and this time it wasn't just her name, it was memory, something only she would recognize, and she whispered, almost breaking now, "That's not me." After she said, "That's not me," the silence that followed didn't feel like relief. It felt like confirmation, like whatever was outside has just successfully completed a step it had been working toward for a long time. The house creaked again, but differently now. Not like pressure, not like bending, like uncertainty, as if the structure itself was no longer sure what it was supposed to be resisting. The old woman took another step backward, and I saw something in her eyes I didn't expect. Not panic, recognition, like she finally understood the shape of the problem she had been running from. Outside, the faceless figures didn't rush. They didn't need to, because something had already changed inside the house. The wall near the broken window rippled again, not physically breaking, just losing definition, like wood and plaster were no longer fully committed to being solid. And then I heard it, her voice again. But this time it wasn't calling her name, it was telling a story, a memory, something from her childhood, something no stranger should ever know. The old woman let out a small broken sound and stepped forward without meaning to, just one step, but that was enough. The figure outside reacted instantly. All of them tilted their heads in sync again, and I realized something horrible. They weren't just copying people anymore, they were extracting versions of them that would respond best. The figure at the window shifted slightly, and now the face forming beneath the surface skin was fully hers, not distorted, not incomplete, accurate, perfectly accurate, like it had studied her long enough to get every detail right. Then it smiled and spoke again in her voice, but softer this time, almost comforting. "You already let me in before." The old woman shook her head violently. "No, no, I didn't." But even as she said it, I saw the hesitation, the crack, the moment doubt entered her memory, and that's when I understood the real horror of Black Hollow. It wasn't breaking in, it was rewriting that what inside had ever meant. The house groaned again, long, slow, and this time the sound didn't come from outside, it came from the foundation, like the entire structure was starting to accept a different set of rules. The fire in the fireplace dimmed to almost nothing, and the shadows in the corners of the room thickened unnaturally, as if depth itself was folding inward. The old woman whispered something I barely heard. "They're not copies." I asked her what she meant. Her eyes never left the window. "They're what we become when we stop being sure of ourselves." Outside, all of them stopped forward together, and the porch didn't creak this time. It welcomed them. After the porch stopped creaking, I realized something even worse had changed. The house wasn't resisting anymore, but it wasn't fully accepting either. It was confused, like whatever rules had governed it for years were being overwritten in real time, and the structure couldn't decide which version of reality to obey. That confusion made everything unstable. The walls didn't just feel like wood now, they felt like hesitation made solid. The old woman stood frozen near the fireplace, shotgun lowered again without her noticing. Her eyes were locked on the window, but I could tell she wasn't just looking at the figure outside anymore. She was seeing something inside her own memory. And that's what terrified me because I started feeling it too. Not visuals, not voices, but interruptions, small fragments of thoughts that didn't belong to me slipping into my mind like someone was editing my memories while I was still using them. Outside, the faceless figures were still there, but they weren't pressing against the house anymore. They were observing the result, like they had already completed the entry process. The house creaked again, and this time I noticed something I wish I hadn't. The sound wasn't coming from one place, it was coming from every direction at once. From the floor, from the ceiling, from the walls. Like the structure had stopped being a container and started becoming a shared surface. The old woman suddenly spoke, voice trembling. I remember letting them in. I turned instantly. What? She shook her head hard. No, I don't. I don't know if I did. That sentence hit me harder than anything outside because doubt had replaced certainty inside her. And the moment it did, the room reacted. The fire in the fireplace bent sideways, flames stretching unnaturally toward the broken window like they were being pulled by something outside. The physics of the house. Then I heard it, not whispering this time, not imitation. A calm, structured voice from outside the wall. Memory is weak inside boundaries. The old woman flinched like she'd been struck. The figure at the window was closer now, no longer faceless, no longer forming, now fully her, perfect in every detail, but wrong in presence. Like her shape had been rebuilt without whatever made her human in the first place. It spoke again, soft, certain. You already agreed. The old woman stepped back. No, I never. But her voice broke halfway through because even she could hear it now, the uncertainty in her own memory. And the house reacted immediately. A long, deep groan ran through the structure like something inside it had finally decided which version of reality was winning. The walls didn't collapse. They aligned slowly, deliberately, like the cabin in Black Hollow was no longer a shelter at all. It was becoming an interpreter, and everything inside it, including us, was being translated. The word translation shouldn't have felt like a threat, but inside the house, it did. Because once the old woman said it again, we're being translated. Something inside the structure shifted like a lock clicking into place, not breaking, not collapsing, just finalizing. The walls no longer creaked randomly, they creaked in rhythm, like the house had learned how to breathe in a way that matched whatever was outside. And the worst part, so had I. I didn't notice it at first, just small things, pauses in my thoughts that didn't feel like mine, moments where I was about to speak and something inside me suggested a different sentence before I even formed the first one. Outside, the figure at the window was still there, still wearing her face, still speaking softly through the broken glass. But now it wasn't just repeating her memory anymore, it was organizing it, like editing, rewriting. The old woman suddenly grabbed her head, stepping back from the fire. I didn't say that, she whispered. But even she didn't sound sure anymore. That's when I understood what Black Hollow really was. It wasn't a place where things entered. It was a place where definitions failed slowly enough that you didn't notice until you were already inside the change. The house groaned again, long, deep, and this time it felt less like wood and more like agreement. Outside, the faceless figures stepped closer again, not rushing, not forcing, just standing at the threshold like they were waiting for the last remaining resistance to finish dissolving. And then they began speaking together, not whistles, not voices, something structured, something almost like language trying to become stable. And I realized they weren't copying us anymore, they were synchronizing us. The old woman turned to me suddenly, and for a brief second I saw clarity return to her eyes. Real fear, real understanding. "They don't break in," she said quietly, "they make you consistent." That sentence landed heavy because I could already feel what she meant. My thoughts weren't contradicting each other anymore, they were aligning, smoothing out. Like something inside me was removing all the parts that didn't match the rest. The house creaked again, but now it wasn't just the structure, it was me noticing it. And the figures outside, they didn't need to move anymore because whatever Black Hollow was becoming was already halfway inside all of us. The last thing I remember clearly wasn't a scream, it wasn't an attack, it wasn't even fear. It was silence becoming complete, not empty, complete. Like every possible sound, thought, and meaning had finally lined up into a single, unavoidable state. The house didn't break, it didn't collapse, it simply stopped behaving like a house. The walls were still there, but I couldn't feel them as barriers anymore. The idea of inside had started dissolving, just like everything else in Black Hollow. The old woman stood very still beside the fireplace. Her face wasn't panicking anymore, it was settling, like she was finally seeing the shape of something she had been running from her entire life. Outside the broken window, the figures stood perfectly aligned now, no longer faceless, no longer copying, no longer separate. They weren't individuals anymore, they were agreement. And I realized something that made my stomach go cold in a way no monster ever had before. They weren't trying to enter the house, because there was no outside left to enter from. The old woman turned her head slightly toward me, and for the first time since this started, her voice was completely steady. "It doesn't take you," she said softly. "It finishes what you already started becoming." The fire in the fireplace dimmed to almost nothing, not dying, just no longer necessary, and then I felt it. Inside me, not a presence, not a voice, but a correction. Everything uncertain in my thoughts started smoothing out. Every fear that contradicted another fear started resolving itself into something simpler, cleaner, stronger. The same process I'd seen happen to the house was happening to me. Outside, the figures didn't move. They didn't need to, because the final threshold wasn't distance anymore, it was difference. And Black Hollow removes difference until only one thing remains: consistency. The old woman exhaled slowly, and I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't being taken, she was understanding. And that was worse, because understanding meant acceptance, and the walls of the house creaked one final time. Not like bending, not like aligning, like finishing a sentence that had been spoken long before I arrived. And in that moment, I finally understood what the hollow was. It wasn't haunted, it wasn't cursed, it wasn't even alive. It was what remains when everything contradictory in a place stops being allowed to exist. And as my thoughts began to settle into that same quiet certainty, I realized the most terrifying part of all. I was no longer trying to leave.